Did Paul corrupt the Bible? This is one of the most explosive questions in Christian-Muslim dialogue, and maybe arguably one of the most important in all of history. There is a claim that Paul corrupted the Bible. That's why the Bible is corrupted, according to Muslims. Is this true? Let's look at it. There's a question of tahrif, that is corruption. The Islamic view today is, among many Muslims, not all Muslims, but many, they believe the original revelations of Moses and Jesus were from God, but Jews and Christians later altered the biblical text. Now, it's interesting that the Quran doesn't actually say this. It talks about altering the meaning of the text, but not the text itself. And it's also not the view of the first 100 years of Islamic scholarship and history. It is a later view. It does seem like the Muhammad of the Quran, they really did believe that Christians have an unaltered text, but that the Christians and Jews were twisting the meaning of the text. The Christians maintain that while the Bible was copied by hand for centuries, its message has been faithfully preserved. No, the claim of Christians is that it's unlike the Islamic claim. We don't believe we have a perfect book from heaven. We believe the Bible is infallible, it is inerrant, but we also know that there's variations in the manuscript. Believe the book is inspired from God, but the Christian view is, yes, there are variants, but the message, the doctrines are the same and unaffected by the manuscripts and the variants. That's something that even Bart Ehrman in the appendix of Misquoting Jesus mentions, even though he's a critic of Christianity. There's a big difference between how Muslims and Christians view the crucifixion. And this is, I think, one of the first problems with the Quran in Surah 4:157. But they neither killed nor crucified him. It was only made to appear so. Even those who argue for the crucifixion are in doubt. They have no knowledge whatsoever, only making assumptions. They certainly did not kill him. So in other words, the Quran makes a claim that Jesus wasn't crucified, even though that is historically proven, even by Muslims' favorite critic of Christianity, Bart Ehrman. The New Testament consistently teaches Jesus was crucified, died, and buried, and rose again. Virtually all modern historians, Christian, Jewish, and atheist, they don't all accept the resurrection, which, if they did that, they will all be Christians. But they accept the crucifixion, as well that Jesus was an historical person, as one of the best established facts of ancient history. Yes, there are very, 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 very few people who I'm sure you can find that deny this, but it's not what practically all the scholars are saying. So the Quran here comes 600 years, 700 years, depending on what dates you go with later, and is making a claim that is against all the historical evidence. If the Quran is from God and it is wrong about an historical fact like the crucifixion, that doesn't really speak well for the Quran. There is another point to be made as well, and it has to do with the gospel. Secular ancient sources from both Romans and Jewish historians corroborate key details about Jesus Christ, affirming his historical existence and the manner of his death. So we see further evidence here that Jesus Christ, according to Tacitus and Josephus, refers to Jesus as a real historical person, and that also he was crucified. So you find this in non-Christian sources as well as in Christian sources. When it comes to non-biblical witness, you also find it in Pliny the Younger. And when you take these together, these independent secular sources from a collective evidence, in addition to the New Testament's core historical claim. So Christians do not make a claim just about theology. They make historical claims that can be evaluated and analyzed by historians, and that is what we will do here. But the question then boils down to, yes, Jesus was an historical person. He was crucified. I mean, he lived, he was crucified, and there are also claims that he resurrected. But wasn't Paul the one that, yeah, sure, Jesus was the real guy, but he was twisting the message. He was the one that messed up everything. Did he invent Christianity? This is a common claim, but it faces a lot of historical problems. Number one, there is 27 New Testament books, 8 different authors. 75% of it, 3/4 of the New Testament, is not written by Paul. No, Paul wrote all the New Testament, just like Muhammad wrote all of the Quran. And if it happened in one geographical location by one man in a very short amount of time, maybe this claim could be supported more broadly. But there are 8 different authors. Paul actually did not write most of the New Testament, which makes it a lot more difficult to make this argument, like we will see. Did Paul invent Christianity? All 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were written by others. For Paul to have hijacked Christianity, he'd need to convince eyewitnesses, rewrite circulating documents, and coordinate churches across the Roman Empire without leaving a trace. Paul's letter actually predates the Gospels, yet they confirm the same core message. Jesus died, was buried, and rose again. The eyewitnesses were still alive and could refute any distortion. No, it is very easy for one man to claim that God gave him a revelation. It's not easy to make this claim when there's a lot of other authors and a lot of other witnesses. We see this in the earliest creed, for example. This is a public letter that Paul wrote. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence here about the resurrection is found in 1 Corinthians 15, and which is about, it should be 3 to 5 years of the crucifixion. It's very hard sometimes to put down exact dates for this. We can see very early creeds kind of that confirm this. And in 1 Corinthians 15 is a public letter which makes a claim that 500 people saw the risen Christ. Again, this is a public letter. It can easily be refuted. It wasn't that back then people were stupid or didn't understand logic. I think people actually, to some extent, without the technology we have today, actually smarter than we are today because they actually had to remember things. Unlike today, where we can rely on technology. So this is very, you make a public letter like that and make this sort of claim that there will be many people who have been witnessing the empty tomb as well as the crucifixion of Christ. So this can easily be refuted in a public creed like this. Why does it matter? This isn't Paul's invention. He explicitly states that he received it. This ancient creed, preached orally before being written down, originated too quickly after the events for legendary development to distort the claims of Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, and appearances. You have scholars like James D.G. Dunn note that Paul received this creed, as the creed will be a reference then here to 1 Corinthians, the message within 1 Corinthians 15. But it would have been received 1 to 3 years after the crucifixion, possibly directly from Peter and James in Jerusalem. And this is not mythology. This is eyewitness era testimony. So we're talking here about eyewitnesses. Muhammad's information, his biography and hadith, is written 200 to 300 years after the death of Muhammad. That is quite different than having eyewitnesses. So the Bible and the New Testament has much better testimony and credibility than the Quranic sources. We also have the manuscript evidence. Our earliest surviving manuscript by the 4th century spanned all of the Roman Empire, North Africa, Middle East, and Europe. For the text to be corrupted, every manuscript tradition across these regions would need to be altered identically, a scenario historians consider to be extremely unlikely. We have manuscripts, the earliest 125 to 150 AD, which is not far away from after the Apostle John died. And in the 4th century, we have the Codex Vaticanus, which is the first full Bible. We have a lot before that as well. We have the Codex Sinaiticus in AD 330 to 360, one of the oldest and most complete manuscripts of the Christian Bible. And we have 5,800 Greek New Testament manuscripts, more than any other ancient document. The New Testament is the most textually attested book in all of antiquity. No other ancient work comes close. There's 86,000 quotations from the early church fathers, Clement of Rome, Polycarp, Irenaeus, Origen. And these are very early fathers, especially Clement of Rome and Polycarp, as well as others. Their writings contained 86,000 quotations. So almost all the New Testament could be reconstructed from the church fathers' writing alone. So if you want to correct some things, we would have found this corruption, and the comparison would have been used when comparing it with the quotations from the early church fathers. This proves the essential content was already widely known before our earliest complete manuscripts. Well, you can say, but it could still happen. Unlikely, almost impossible. We know that martyrs die not for false things, but for what they believe is true. It doesn't prove that what they believe is true, but it does prove that they are convinced that it is true themselves. And if they're altering the scriptures collectively, then they know it's false and they're not willing to die for it. Martyrdom alone, again, does not prove that Christianity is true. It does give it credibility. But the apostles were eyewitnesses, not followers of a second-hand story. People may die for what they believe is true. They are far less likely, and in most cases, will never die for something they know is false. And they would not have fabricated a resurrection. Why on earth would they endure imprisonment, persecution, and martyrdom without recanting if it was false? Well, there is also the minimal facts approach. Many New Testament scholars, including skeptics, identify a core set of historical facts about Jesus' death and resurrection that are overwhelmingly supported by the evidence. These minimal facts are widely accepted by historians because they are so well attested. Jesus died by crucifixion. Disciples believed they saw him risen. And Paul's conversion. The enemy of the church, Paul, became a Christian and started promoting Christianity instead of persecuting the church and Christians. So these three facts show us that there is an immense amount of credibility within the Christian claim. Jesus died by crucifixion. Disciples believed that they saw him risen, Paul's conversion, and there's two other ones as well. There's James' conversion and the empty tomb. All these are historical facts that can be verified, objectively speaking. There were a lot of witnesses that Jesus' own brother, James, who was skeptical of Jesus Christ as God and the resurrection, actually became a Christian and a follower, believing his own brother was God, which is extraordinary. You try to think if your own brother would make that claim to you. You can maybe fool people outside your family, but you can never fool your own family. They know you too well. There's also theological consistency. The New Testament presents a unified message from multiple authors, not just Paul. There is the divinity of Christ. In John 10:30, I am the Father and one are one. The radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his nature in Hebrews 1:3, Trinity in the Old Testament. Isaiah 48:12-16 speaks of the first and the last, who also says, the Lord God has sent me, and his Spirit. So you see a unified theological message. You see theological consistency. For so God loved the world that he gave his only Son, John 3:16. There's consistency in the Old as well as in the New Testament, and it cannot just be attributed to Paul alone. From Matthew to Revelation, written by fishermen, tax collectors, doctors, scholars across the decades, the theological unity of the New Testament, it is some remarkable evidence of a single divine source. These people were diverse. There is the Old Testament prophecies. The Bible's eternal consistency point to a divine authorship of all 300 prophecies detailed about Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. He was born in Bethlehem, born of a virgin, betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, hands and feet pierced, lots cast for garment, no bones broken. These detailed predictions, written hundreds of years in advance, highlight the extraordinary coherence and the prophetic accuracy of the biblical narrative. So in the light of all of this, if then Paul will have to corrupt Christianity, corrupt the New Testament, and alter all these things, he would have to, before all manuscripts were collected, this corruption had to occur before 125 to 350 AD, which is quite early. Number two, it had to happen across the entire empire, Rome, North Africa, the Middle East, Asia, without leaving a single evidence of the original text. This is not a time with airplane, with an iPhone, with a car. It takes a long time to travel from A to B. And to do this collectively like this across such big geographical distance is practically impossible. He had to, with the apostles, be complicit, or they have to be silent. The apostles have to go along with this, at least decide to not do anything about it. The apostles and their closest associates would have to participate or fail to expose this corruption. Church fathers preserving only the altered version. So the church fathers who quoted the New Testament extensively never recorded awareness of a previous text. And these church fathers are almost at the same time as the last apostles. So they're so close to the apostles that it will require a lot to be able to pull something like this off. There is certain objections that are made here. Concerns about the New Testament reliability are often based on misunderstandings. Has the Bible been translated too many times? This is another claim that often comes up. Modern translations are made directly from thousands of ancient Greek and Hebrew manuscripts, not from previous translations. Scholars compare these texts to ensure accuracy, preventing a game of telephone effects. In other words, we have a really, really good translation of the Bible. We have many good translations of the Bible, depending if you value literal translations or more fluid translations that are more readable. But there is also the claim that the Council of Nicaea changed the Bible. The Council of Nicaea in 325 addressed the nature of Christ, specifically his divinity. It did not decide all the books of the Bible. The New Testament canon was already widely accepted by the early church father based on the apostolic authorship and widespread use. What about the thousands of errors in the manuscripts? The vast majority of textual variants are minor spelling or grammatical differences. Less than 1% are meaningful and viable, and no major Christian doctrine is affected by the textual variants. These present a core message remains remarkably consistent. The real question to ask is, are there no historical evidence that can demonstrate that a coordinated corruption occurred or not? The manuscript evidence strongly supports that the New Testament we have today substantially preserves the writing of the earliest Christians. This does not prove Christianity is true. Historical evidence alone cannot establish divine inspiration. But the debate is not whether the biblical text has been massively rewritten. It is whether the message preserved in those early writings are true. Have they been altered? Have they been changed according to the claim that Muslims make? I think the conclusion is quite clear. There is no intentional corruption, remarkable textual preservation. There's eyewitness credibility and sacrifice, people being willing to die for this truth. And there's theological unity beyond Paul. Paul, certainly in the Bible as a whole, and even in the New Testament, is not the only guy. There's 40 authors and throughout the Bible, and 8 authors in the New Testament. And Paul is just one of those guys, responsible for 25% of the New Testament. Patristic quotations confirm this content. We have so many quotes that we can look at this and see if there has been corruption. The evidence overwhelmingly supports the conclusion that the New Testament we have today substantially preserves the writing of the earliest Christians. The debate therefore shifts from the text integrity to the truth of the message. I would really encourage everyone to read a book called Whatever Happened to Christianity by Fred Farouk, a tafsir for Muslim scholars and thinkers. And this book provides a deeper exploration of how early Christian message has been preserved and transmitted throughout history, offering scholarly analysis on the topic covered in this presentation. It's a really, really good book, and I used some of the ideas. I'm definitely inspired by this book for the presentation. So I would like, again, just to kind of reassure this thing. The claim of Muslims is that hundreds of years later, there was a guy popping up in a desert in Arabia, geographically, culturally, and linguistically far away, miles and miles away from the original place where it happened, and hundreds of years later, claiming that the original text is the corrupted one and the later text is the real one. This claim is no less absurd almost than the Book of Mormon. So why then is not the Book of Mormon replacing both the Bible and the Quran and every other religious text, like Mormonism claims that, the Bible has been corrupted? And obviously the Book of Mormon also would claim to be superior to the Quran, even though it doesn't really go into Islam as much. It's more of a criticism, I think, of Christianity, or fulfillment of Christianity, like they probably would see it. And the truth is that it is impossible to say that something that comes much later has more credibility than that which comes early. And in the light of the information about Paul, I think we also can conclude that Paul did not corrupt the New Testament. I think the New Testament, at least textually speaking, is reliable. And it's also worth exploring, and I would encourage everyone to look into the New Testament themselves and to actually look if the New Testament not only is credible textually speaking, but is it also true? That was everything for today. We'll see you again soon.